Okay, sorry about that. I have a class just before this one, and the Zoom was still processing the recording for the previous class. Getting my notes up. I think today will be short. Let's see. This. Let's see. We are recording. That's good. Let me share my screen. Okay. How far did we get yesterday? We did that. We did that. We did that. We did that. Let's go through the notation some more, and I'll have more of this as we go through. First of all, are there questions from what we talked about Wednesday? Questions on these notes?
Sounds like a no.
Sounds like a no, doesn't it? Did I put in? Okay. I need to add a question section, a question discussion for each module. I'll add that in today. And that way, if you have questions, you can ask them there. I'll answer them either in the discussion and or in the lecture. All right. So let me just reinforce a few things. This should not take all 50 minutes then. Maybe some of this will. We talked about what an object was. It's something that you can classify, and it's something that you can describe, particularly the things that are going to be useful in terms of software development. Usually they're things that you can describe where you change state. You describe those using attributes, and then you have methods by which you can change state, and that's why we get down to the basic idea of an object. An object is something that has attributes and methods. The attributes describe the state. The methods either modify or can report on the state. So sometimes you modify the attributes, but sometimes an external object might just need to know the value of an attribute. And so in this case with the sheepdog game, we could say an external entity might need to ask, hey, where's the sheep? What's the X location? What's the Y location of the sheep? Or for example, if you're doing the move method of the sheep, you might need to know where the dog is. So the sheep might ask the dog, where are you? And then the dog would have a method that all that method does is it returns the value of the attribute that was asked for. And we'll see that that's a standard way to do objects. Next week, I'll start doing Java code examples, and you'll see how that works. And what I want to do next week is fairly much as early as possible. I'll do some simple examples that have really nothing to do with the object-oriented paradigm, but just show you some basic Java terminology and convince yourself that you can actually write, compile, and run a Java program. And then right after that, and it'll be before the Wednesday lecture or during the Wednesday lecture, actually start to say, okay, but how do objects actually work with other objects? I want to start to get you used to the idea of objects working with other objects as quickly as possible, even though it technically isn't needed until 3 or 4 weeks out. Also, I posted the first homework assignment. So if we look at assignments, all of these homeworks are placeholders, but in the first homework I submitted, there's your actual homework assignment. It's a very simple programming assignment. And Dean was going to have labs posted, see how they're still ghosted out. You guys can't see them yet. He should have those posted for you by the end of the day. And starting next week, I'll start to fill in these project ones also. My plan is to periodically make announcements about, hey, here's what changed on the site and here's what you need to be paying attention to. Okay, so we will talk about that next week. To get you ready for that, or to get you looking at how Java software actually looks, let's cover these last two slides. I kind of rushed through them the other day because I was running out of time, so let's have a little bit more time devoted to these. When you are defining a class, you define a class using capital letters. Attributes start with lowercase and make your attribute names descriptive of the thing they're describing. So instead of X, Y, and S for X location, Y location, and speed, I could have used that X, Y, and S for my attribute names in the example that we had previously with the sheep and the dog. But if I look at X, Y, and S, I don't know what that means. More importantly, if someone else looks at that code, they don't know what it means. And as a programmer, you say, well, I don't care. I'm going to use X, Y, and S because I know what it means. Yeah, you know what it means on Wednesday. Do you know what it means next Wednesday? Oh, I'm going to just use X, Y, and S, and then I'll put a comment in there that explains what they are. Why? Your code should have minimal comments. Get the mindset that including a comment in code is a sign of bad code. Just do good code and you don't need nearly as many comments. There is a religious war going on in the software engineering community right now as to the value of comments. So lowercase names, you tend to make them long, and so every new phrase or word that shows up in the name, you do a capital letter. That's called camel hump notation. Variables that are created within a method, I think most of you are familiar with the idea of a variable that is local to a function. This is the exact same idea. Variables that you might have to create locally inside of a method are named like attributes. And constant values are named using all caps. If you don't follow these rules, your code will compile. Your code will run. But when you're working on a team or you go to work for a company and you start being lazy with stuff like this, you will not be as valuable to that company as if you are doing this kind of convention. In addition, the company itself will have what they call a style guide. In whatever language you're programming in, they will give you an idea of how that code should look, how you should write it. If you are coming from a MATLAB environment, you may not be familiar with the notion of declaring a variable. In most programming languages, that's not a provable statement. I'm going to go with it anyway. In most programming languages, you have to do what's called declaring the variable before you use it. Basically what you do is you tell the computer, hey, I'm going to use X location. But before you start using X location, you tell the computer that. And you tell it by identifying the data type that you're using. And in Java and other object-oriented programming languages, you also say who's going to be allowed to see it. You can set what's called a visibility modifier. And you can make your attributes private or public or protected. Protected is rarely used. Private means nobody outside the object can see it. Public means anybody and everybody can see it. Protected is a mixture of the two. You kind of have to belong to the same grouping of classes in order to see it. Make all your attributes private. The simple rule. When you have attributes, make them private. Your methods, 99% of your methods will be public. Your classes, every single one of your classes will be public. So when you're defining these things, don't forget to put those in. All your attributes private, most methods are public, all classes are public. You're going to see a lot of brackets in Java programming. Curly brackets always bound blocks of programs. Parentheses do tell you parameter input for methods, and square brackets are used for arrays. Other than the curly brackets, the parentheses and the square brackets, I think, are pretty universal. If you came from a MATLAB background, you're familiar with those. If you came from C, you're familiar with curly brackets also. MATLAB tends to bound things using words like then, else, if, end if, end, things like that. So as I said earlier, Java requires that you declare the attributes. You have to provide, you should provide a visibility modifier, followed by a data type, followed by the name of the thing. So what are the basic data types? The most common ones are int, which is short for integer, double, which is a numeric value, but it doesn't have to be an integer value. So now you've got fractions or decimals. Char, usually pronounced char, which is a single character. That's obviously short for character. You should really think of it, though, not just a character of an alphabet, but a single keystroke. So it could be the backspace key. It could be the, the forward slash, the backslash, the $sign. It's a single keystroke. And then a string is a sequence of characters. So you might have things that look like this: private, int, xspeed. Private means if you're not part of this object, you can't see it. Int means it's an integer value. Xspeed is the name of the attribute. Public double xspeed. Now everybody can see it. It's still a numeric value, but it's not integer, and it's still named xspeed. You wouldn't have both of those in the same program or the same class, by the way. I'm just giving you examples. The reason this one is bad is because of public. You don't want, don't make your attributes public. Private int max speed equals 20. Here you're saying, oh, look, I'm keeping a, I'm setting it equal to 20 and I never want to change it. And so I'm going to make it, capital letters to tell people that it's a constant. To be technically correct, I still have to do one more thing to make that a constant, but we'll talk about that in a couple of lectures down the road. To do a method, it would look like public int move with parentheses. The fact that these parentheses are empty are telling you that this method requires no input. Well, wait a minute, how can the method work if it doesn't have any input? Well, it works this way. All methods have access to all the attributes. So the move method would look at existing attributes. For example, a standard move method for the sheepdog game, remember we have x location, y speed, y speed, would be to take the x location and the x speed and make a new x location based on the speed, take the y location, the y speed, make a new y location based on the y speed, and it would update the x and y locations. That's a standard way to go. And what's this int doing there? If this is a method, why do I need to declare a data type? Because methods sometimes return values. And if you return a value, you have to tell the compiler what kind of value you are going to return. So we're telling it, okay, this is the move method. It doesn't take any input, and it returns an integer value. Oh, and it's public, so anybody can use it. And then you would include these curly brackets. Now I'm showing them as empty, but inside the curly brackets is where you actually put the code for that move method. The only thing I changed in the going to the next line is the return type. Instead of saying int, it's void. Why is that? Because some methods don't return anything. They just manipulate the attribute values. They just modify the attribute values, but they don't actually return anything. So you are required to have a return type. What's the return type of nothing? Void. That's the word that's used for that. So we'll do this in much more detail in next week. But if I go back to, say, the sheepdog game, I might have something like this: public class animal, and then I do curly brackets. And why do I do curly brackets? Because curly brackets always, always, always designate hunks of program, and this is a class. So I'm telling the compiler, hey, I'm going to define a class. And then you put in all your attributes. And then you put in all your methods. And the attributes that we had were X location, Y location, right? That was. So how do I declare these things? Well, let's see. They're attributes, so make them private. Spell it right. And I think having non-integer locations is probably a good idea, but it is going to be numeric. Therefore, this would look like that. So I'm just giving you an idea of what to expect when we start to look at Java. Methods go here. Let's see if we're going to move things: public, void, move, and then curly brackets again, because whatever I do to move this thing is going to be defined inside of here. So that's what, when we start to look at Java code next week, that's what to expect. What did we have? Private, double, X speed, Y speed. And a simple move method might look something like this. X location equals X location plus X speed. Y location equals Y location plus Y speed plus. Okay. Now, this may have confused about half of you, what I just did. So please ask the question. What doesn't look right? What doesn't make sense?
I had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
For between the public int move and then the public void move, what would be the an example of the void move? Because obviously the dog would still have the X and Y location, and then the sheep would still have the X and Y location. So what would be the void example?
So it's common to have these things that are called getters, and you literally call them get. Whoops, I'm sorry. So this is an example of a method that actually returns a value to somebody. So somebody external to this object could say, hey, I need to know the X location. So I'm going to call the get X location method, and you're going to return to me the value of the X location attribute. And since the value of the X location attribute is a double, then the return type is a double. But what's happening here is we're just moving things. In other words, we're changing the attribute values, right? You can see the attribute values are changing, but I don't return a value to anybody. So somebody could call me and say, move the animal, right? Move. And this method would move the animal, but it wouldn't then tell anybody about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that clears things up. Yeah.
Okay. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. If you move the animal, don't you want to know about it? Yeah. So here's what you do. You move the animal, and then you say, tell me the X location, tell me the Y location. So it makes the work on the external entity that's asking the questions, it's going to make them do a little bit more work. But you'll see in the long run, it's a better technique. Variables declared but not defined. Is get X location supposed to have a capital X? Oh, 2 questions. Okay, so declared but not defined. So what do we mean by definition? Christopher, you asked that first. How would you distinguish declaring from defining?
Oh, I mean, you declare the variables, but you didn't assign them any values. But now that I saw that methods
That's
go
correct.
here,
Yeah, you're right. I did not. And I'm going to use the word initialization instead of definition. Okay.
Okay.
Declared them, but I did not initialize them. That's correct. And normally, obviously you want to do some kind of a positive initialization. Get X location supposed to have a capital X. That's a style choice. So remember how hump notation works? You start out with lowercase, and then every phrase or word after that is uppercase. And since I started with lowercase g, I make the choice, okay, do I want that to be capital X or not? And I just happen to use capital X. Will it still have access to the X location attribute, even though I called it the wrong thing here? What do you think?
Yes, it will.
Yeah, it will, because when I actually reference it, I reference it correctly down here. Someone asked, do I need this.x location? No, I do not. All methods have attributes to the attributes. And I will struggle mightily to get you to never, ever, ever use this. There are very few times you actually need it. So no, you don't need it. Now we'll talk about when this works and when this doesn't work. And then, and the introduction to that is this question. If I have this public class animal class, do I actually have an animal object or not? Is defining the class enough? What do you think? Yes, it's a yes or no. Have 50-50.
No, you haven't made an object.
Pardon?
I said you have not made an object, so no.
Not made yeah, you have not made an object. And again, get this distinction clear. What I've done is I've designed an animal. This is the design, but it is not an animal. So I would need to actually build the animal somewhere. And when you want a new animal, you literally do that with what's called the new keyword. You would have something like sheep, sheep number 1 equals new animal. Animal number 1 equals new animal. And we'll talk about that next week, right off the bat, to get you used to working with objects. And then we'll introduce that idea and then talk a lot more about it in a couple as we go through the lectures that talk about how to build Java programs. Gabriel asked if you're able to declare multiple attributes at once, and Pablo said yes, and that's correct. You can do that all at once. It's a style choice. I could have done all of these on the same line. That's a style choice, but I don't like to just group them all together. What I like to do is I will do very few attributes on the same line for clarity of reading, and I will group them by their job. So X and Y location both have the same job, that's position, and X and Y speed both have the same job, that's movement. If I had acceleration, I'd have a second line for X acceleration, Y acceleration. And I would have a separate line. I think I put max speed in there, right? Because it's got a different job. Who are you writing for? You are writing for other humans. So just like any other form of writing, try to write with clarity. And grouping things like that helps with clarity. Now you may find other ways you can group things that contribute to clarity. That's fine. But yeah, you can do multiple ones. You can initialize them right off the bat if you want to. I tend not to do this. I don't like it. Why? It makes it harder to read. And I believe you should build separate initialization methods, because if you want to radically change how you do the initialization, it's easier. Okay, so this is the kind of thing we're going to look at next week. Okay. Other questions? These are good. All right, so the things to take away from this. Go for it, Matthew.
Yeah, sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand quick enough. I'm just wondering if you care if we have the brackets on the line where we declare the method, or if you mind if we put them on a new line. The open brackets, yeah, like that.
Right? Yeah. I am a big fan of this, but I don't, it's not wrong. It's a style choice. Now, having said that, anyone who does that is clearly going to hell, right? So, preference. But no, there is no technical wrongness with that. You will find when you work for a particular company and they give you a style guide that they will, number one, tell you which way they want, and number two, that's probably one of the things that people fight the most over and pound the table over. It's the bracket bolt
Okay.
or there.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Okay, we'll do lots more of this. This is what the next, let's look at the schedule here if I can find it real quick. This is what the next few weeks look like. We're going to do very simple stuff next week. And then we'll start into, I think next week will take 2 lectures, and then we'll start into selection and loops. So selection is if then else, and loops are for loops and while loops. There are other forms. I don't care, because if you cover those 2, you can do all the other forms. And then we'll get into doing arrays and expanding more on methods. So I'm going to introduce objects and methods here next week, even hopefully a gentle introduction, and then we'll continue to get you used to working with them the 3rd week of the course. And then by the time we get to arrays, methods, and I'll start to talk about coding techniques, I'll do a lot more about, okay, when do you really need to build a method? Why should you build a method? How should you build a method? That kind of thing. And then continue that into objects and classes. So notice the first 3 weeks are really about the basics of just, okay, how do I assign things? How do I make a variable? How do I assign a value to it? How do I do if then else? How do I do loops? How do I do arrays? That kind of thing. And then we start to get into more sophisticated stuff with objects and classes and inheritance, the real object-oriented paradigm stuff. Which is how I recommend you approach learning any new language. Learn how to create a variable, how to assign to it, do an if then else, do a loop, and then do an array. And then you'll spend the rest of your life learning how to do IO, because it's always the ugliest part of any language. But if you get those basics down, you've got the basics of the language down. Reminder, all these methods have access to all the attributes. Even though the attribute is private, I said the attribute is private, why does this method have access to that attribute if it's a private attribute? Everybody's inside the animal class, that's why. Right? So that inside the animal class, every method inside the animal class has access to all the attributes inside the animal class. But if I go to another, like the terrain or the game controller class or something like that, they do not have direct access to the attributes. They have to ask permission through these kinds of methods. Hey, could you please tell me the X location? They have to ask permission to see it. And again, why is that? Data encapsulation, the #1 benefit of the object-oriented paradigm. Okay, other questions? If we don't have them, then I think we can call this done. And I'll see you on Monday where we'll, I'm gonna post code examples. Let me show you one thing. I'm sorry, I will let you go. Let's see, did I do it this way? Sample code. No, I didn't do it that way. All right, I'll show it over the weekend, that's okay. I put together a sample code and I put together 2 forms of the sample code. One is bare bones and one was with just a whole boatload of comments in it to try to explain what the code is doing. And so you'll have both of those, and then we'll go through those next week and also play around with, hey, what if I change this? What if I change that kind of question? So that's the goal for next week. Next Friday, we'll start doing the project lectures and familiarize you with what the expectations are for that. And I will have project material posted prior to that so you can understand, have access to the actual assignments. Okay. Anything else? Last chance?
That quiz is due at midnight tonight, right?
Yeah, midnight tonight, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thanks guys. Oh, wait, one more, let me make sure. Anything that's accessible, I need to make that homework accessible. And yes, I don't have an issue with time frames on that. I think I just wanted to make sure, as long as that homework's accessible, by all means, you can start it, you can finish it. If you can turn that in early, early is always good. And in a course like this, there's all different ranges of experience and expertise. So I fully expect that there's going to be a few people in the class who have absolutely no trouble finishing that assignment right off the bat. And there's going to be other people that are confused about it, and that's normal. That's all of that is fine, because that's what this course is about. Okay, anybody else? 5-second rule. All right. Have a wonderful day, guys. Good weekend too.
You too, sir.